Hollywood loves to say based on a true story, but when it comes to World War II, that usually means Nicolas Cage fighting cartoon sharks in a film about one of the Navy's worst tragedies. George Lucas turning the Tuskegee Airmen into comic book heroes, and Spike Lee rewriting a Nazi massacre. These aren't just bad war movies, they're straight-up lies about history. This is supposed to be the tragic story of the USS Indianapolis, a Navy ship sunk in 1945 after delivering parts for the atomic bomb, leaving hundreds of sailors drifting for days, surrounded by sharks. Nicolas Cage is in the lead, Tom Sizemore and Thomas Jane backing him up. It's a huge story, one of the most infamous tragedies in American naval history, but the film was a total disaster. Military historian Lawrence Seward was absolutely right when he called it very disrespectful of the men who were on board the Indianapolis. They deserved better. The production values here are Sci-Fi Channel bad. CGI sharks everywhere, awkward acting, and every other scene shifts tone for no reason. Dialogue is just clunky exposition, and then, right in the middle of all this real-life horror, they shoehorn in a fake love triangle. It's embarrassing. Glenn Kenny was probably being generous when he called it not exactly unwatchable, but also completely not worthy of watching. The film doesn't come close to honoring what those sailors went through. Spike Lee's Miracle at St. Anna had big ambitions, shining a light on black soldiers in World War II Italy. But what people remember is the controversy. The movie dramatizes the 1944 St. Anna massacre, where hundreds of Italian civilians were killed by the SS. But the script changes history and basically lies, claiming the massacre was triggered by a local partisan betraying his neighbors. This didn't just irritate historians, it flat out enraged surviving resistance fighters. A 2005 military tribunal had already established the massacre was a premeditated Nazi atrocity, not provoked by the locals. But the film suggests otherwise. Former partisans protested, some even reaching out directly to Lee, but he just doubled down and refused to apologize. Giovanni Cipollini, deputy head of the Partisans Association, called the film a travesty of history. Lee, for his part, said he made the movie to counter war films that erased black soldiers from the story, but the historical twist just set off a storm. Beyond the historical mess, the movie itself just isn't good. Critics found it overlong, tonally all over the place, mixing brutal violence with random mystical subplots and heavy melodrama. It bombed at the box office, and whatever good intentions it started with got buried. George Lucas put up his own money, brought in Cuba Gooding Jr. and Terrence Howard, and tried to turn the Tuskegee Airmen into blockbuster heroes. The story deserves better. Instead, Red Tails leans into flat characters, cliché dialogue, and a version of history where a couple of speeches and some flashy dogfights magically solve racism. The real Tuskegee Airmen fought the enemy abroad and prejudice at home. But here it's all cartoonish heroics. Dogfights that look ripped from a comic book, problems wrapped up by the next scene. Even the technical advisor, Dr. Daniel Hallman, said the movie gets plenty wrong. The script claims the airmen destroyed a German destroyer by strafing it. Never happened. It acts like the 332nd Fighter Group was the only escort on the Berlin mission. There were actually 5. And the old myth that they never lost a bomber gets trotted out again, even though the records say otherwise. Airstrike is what happens when you throw $65 million and Bruce Willis at a World War II script and still get nothing out of it. This U.S.-Chinese co-production is set during the Japanese bombing of Chongqing. Supposedly, it's about 5 people defending the city and a secret piece of military tech. Bruce Willis, for reasons unknown, plays an American airman giving pep talks. Released as The Bombing in some markets, it's infamous for a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Dialogue is badly dubbed, the special effects are straight out of a cartoon, and the whole movie feels patched together after a dozen re-edits. Bruce Willis mugs his way through every scene, and the aerial battles defy both gravity and history. There's literally a pilot landing his plane on a moving truck. Zeros, which weren't even in service at the time, pop up everywhere. This movie didn't just get panned, it was yanked from theaters and dumped online. At this point, Airstrike is mostly a punchline. How do you spend $65 million and end up with something that looks this cheap? Steven Spielberg's 1941 is infamous for different reasons. This isn't a case of lying so much as completely missing the point. Right after Pearl Harbor, Los Angeles descends into slapstick chaos, at least according to this movie. It's a comedy, but nobody's laughing. The film jumbles together the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, a real panic where anti-aircraft crews fired at nothing, with a Japanese sub shelling the coast and the Zoot Suit riots, all in one frenzied night-long farce. Critics said the movie just collapses under a glut of ideas, trying to trade in history for noise. Even Spielberg admits in hindsight that it's hard to watch, saying it felt like I had committed a war crime after seeing the reactions. John Wayne was offered a part, read the script, and called it the most anti-American piece of drivel he had ever read in his life. If you ask a historian, this movie is basically a case study in how not to handle the facts. You get a big and very expensive spectacle. Sure, the attack scenes look impressive, but the historical record gets mangled every which way. Forget the love triangle. That's straight-up fiction. The movie goes even further, inventing things like American pilots fighting in the Battle of Britain before the U.S. was even in the war. That simply didn't happen. No active-duty American Army Air Corps pilots were sent to fight for Britain. The handful of Americans who did volunteer had to actually join the Royal Air Force. Military historian Marty Morgan didn't mince words. He gave the film an F- for accuracy, pointing out it doesn't take a scholar to spot the mistakes. According to him, there's a basic contempt here for the reality of the time period. You get stuff like the modern USS Lexington standing in for a ship that wasn't even built until the 1990s. There are nurses wandering around in uniforms that didn't exist in the 1940s, and at one point the movie even shows the Arizona Memorial in 1941. Never mind that it wouldn't be built for another 20 years. Escape to Athena is a strange one. A mix of war action, campy comedy, and an absolutely wild script that has almost nothing to do with real history. The setup is simple here. Allied prisoners of war and Greek resistance fighters team up to stop Nazi officers from looting treasures and sabotaging a secret Axis rocket base on a Greek island. Entertaining maybe, but if you're looking for historical accuracy, there's nothing here. There was never a mission like this, and there definitely weren't any Axis rocket bases hidden in the Aegean. The tone swings from serious to tongue-in-cheek, and you end up with things like motorcycle chases through Greek villages and even a full-on Dixieland band. The whole thing feels more 1970s than 1940s, and the script just jumps from one outlandish moment to the next. There's no real attempt to stick to wartime reality or document what actually happened in Greece during the occupation. What you get instead is a pure fantasy heist with a war backdrop. The Misfit Brigade, also known as Wheels of Terror, is supposedly based on Sven Hassel's famous novels about German penal battalions on the Eastern Front. But the movie doesn't even try to capture the gritty realism of those books. Hassel's stories are all about the brutal reality of fighting on the Eastern Front, as convicts sent on missions that could get them killed at any moment. The film, on the other hand, swaps that out for a bunch of cartoonish antics. The soldiers become more like a knockoff Dirty Dozen than anything resembling the real penal units. Almost everything you see in the film is made up for effect. There's a tank duel, there's a wild mission to blow up a train. These things just didn't happen the way the movie presents. Sometimes you get a brief moment where the tanks are era-accurate T-34s, German assault guns, but it's never enough to ground the movie in anything real. The comedy undercuts the combat, and any sense of authenticity is gone. Shining Through is one of those movies where even the basic premise doesn't hold up. You have Melanie Griffith playing an American secretary who somehow gets recruited to spy in Nazi Germany. No real training, just sent straight into Berlin, where she blunders through one implausible scenario after another. She can't cook a German meal, she slips up constantly, but still manages to get into the heart of a rocket facility and back out. None of this adds up. Reviewers pointed out just how little research went into the script. At one point, she and her lover run across a white painted line into Switzerland, and the Nazis just stop, as if that's all it takes to escape. That kind of border fantasy is nowhere close to how things actually went down. On top of that, the movie floats ideas like American intelligence officers waltzing in and out of Berlin at will, totally unrealistic. It's packed with coincidences and contrivances, and the historical errors pile up so fast it's hard to keep track. Shining Through ended up with multiple Razzie Awards for a reason. It just doesn't care about getting anything right. Windtalkers is kind of a mixed bag. It's one of the only war movies that actually shows the Navajo Code Talker program, the real story of Native American Marines using their language as an unbreakable code in the Pacific. But the film takes all that history and buries it under a pile of Hollywood cliches and big action set pieces. The focus shifts away from the Code Talkers themselves and lands squarely on Nicolas Cage's character, which a lot of people rightfully criticized. There was even some behind-the-scenes drama with the Pentagon. In the script, Cage's Marine is given orders to kill the Code Talker if he's about to be captured by the Japanese. The Marine Corps Liaison Office called that un-Marine, said it was fiction, and demanded changes. But survivors and even Congress later confirmed those kinds of orders did exist, though in the end, Wu and the studio caved and changed the movie anyway. Windtalkers opened against The Bourne Identity and Scooby-Doo, didn't stand a chance, and quickly disappeared from theaters. Reviews were mostly negative. For John Woo, it was his first big Hollywood bomb. After a string of hits, he couldn't get better scripts and eventually walked away from big studio films for good.